Good morning, everybody. It is 8:30 on Thursdays. That means we're having breakfast together. Must be blue shirt day. Thanks, Ken. You picked up on a trend, huh? That and sweaters. I was waiting for somebody down here to call me Mr. Rogers. But anyway, let's start off with the way we do every week, where I can ask if you could just type in where you're from. That lets me know that you're hearing my voice. Mark says purgatory, Alan.
Me too.
Okay. Great. Okay, so we got a lot of people have in limbo, Courtney. A lot of people are putting where they're located, so I know that they're hearing me, which is good. I'm sure there's some people who say they're not hearing me. Please check the sound and connections on your computer, but I do know that my voice is getting out there. Good morning, Teresa. So I want to welcome everybody. Back by popular demand, we have a similar topic and similar presenters. Today we're going to be going over a case study for forgiveness and FTE. We've been talking a lot about forgiveness, a little bit about FTEs, and we decided what would probably be best if we gave you some sort of case study so you could see how it flows through. I will let the presenters who I'll give their name in a second, give any caveats that are out there. You have to remember this is just an example, and your particular situation may have a few more nuances that you'd have to follow. If you are going to look for the handouts, if you go in your dashboard down towards the bottom, you'll see a little arrow with handouts and a 1. You can download the handouts to follow along. And to save for your future reference. If you have any questions, feel free to type in the question box. As the presenters are going along, I'll be reading the questions and try and get some of them in if I can figure out how to break in on these two. There will be 4 polling questions, and I will launch one in a second. If you're signing up for this to get CPE, you have to respond to at least 75% of those polling questions. We'll leave them up till we get a high percent or about a minute, whichever my attitude is, and then we will close it down and share the results. So jumping into today, we have 2 presenters, as I said before, that really need very little introduction. We have Alan Sobel and Mike LaForge. They presented to us before. Alan is the managing partner at the firm. Mike has been a senior partner at the firm and has extensive background not only in the PPP, but consulting his clients in accounting, tax, and various matters. At that point, I'm going to turn it over to Alan because you want to hear from him and not me.
Alan? Actually, it's Brad. It's Brad. It's Mike who's going to kick us off.
Oh, then before Mike starts, and I didn't want to tease them, Mike, but let's launch the first poll, and because it may give you some information. If you receive PPP, will you rehire laid off employees, file for forgiveness, use it as a low-cost loan, or give it back? I didn't mean to tease you, Mike, with that.
Well, I was a little disappointed. I was all set to provide you with polling questions, and you told me that they were already put together. My first polling question would have been, what are you wearing? Casual, pajamas, or business attire?
Well, they can answer that in the question box, and I'll let you know what a lot of them said. So
okay, that sounds good.
We're almost at a minute. And Colleen, we're having problems with the people clicking on them again. I don't know if you had this yesterday. So I'm going to close it out, and I got 89%. I don't know how many responded to say that they're filing for forgiveness. You'll see the results. But Ted, I think, Ted, you've said it in the past. So Colleen, I don't know if we're having a problem with this. But all right, Mike, I'm going to hide the results and now really go to you.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Glad that everybody was able to join today. I think what we've been doing over the last several weeks is providing you with information which is coming off of Q&As, coming off of the CARES Act and so on. This is the first one that we've really done. We're working with some real numbers and actually going through a case study. So it should be a little bit different. We do have slides that'll have real live information posted in there. So a couple things just to let everybody know what life is these days. Now that we're in this 8-week period for most of the people who have gotten this paycheck, have gotten this loan, is every single morning before a lot of us get up and brush our teeth or take showers, we're going online to see whether or not the Treasury and SBA has come up with a new question. I think this yesterday we got question number 46 and 47. And for people that have been working with the PPP, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And at the rate they're going, I figure that sometime around Memorial Day, maybe we'll be at question 67 and 68. And then at that point in time, maybe we'll finally have a full boat of instructions and what we're going to have as final clarification for all these things. So again, thanks for being on the webinar. We don't know whether or not we're going to be able to give you all the answers because there's a lot of stuff out there that still is not clear. So again, hopefully we can get through all that stuff. And if you're on this to get all the answers, my feeling is that you just can't always get what you want. Disclaimer, okay? Like I said, many questions still exist. Presentation is our best assessment as to what we know at this point in time. And the only thing that we know for sure is that some of these calculations and some of these interpretations are going to change. Again, we're looking at this thing from the standpoint of the 56-day clock that started. We're assuming that people have a general knowledge as to what the overall rules are concerning this. And by the way, this demonstration would apply to both for-profit and nonprofit entities. So with that, Alan's going to kick off a little bit about the background and get this thing show on the road.
Great, thanks, Mike. And yes, good morning, everybody. I hope that these series of webinars have been helpful to you. We have heard that people are looking for a little bit more detail on how this works, and that's what Mike and I are going to attempt to do today. Mike, you can't always get what you want, but if you try sometime, you just might find you get what you need. So hopefully we're going to give them what they need a little bit today. I'm going to start out by kind of just introducing the notion of the PPP forgiveness. And the way that we're viewing this is it's a six-step process, not all related to the forgiveness itself, but all related to the PPP program. So the six-step process begins with determining the loan amount. At this particular point in time, most of you should have already determined your loan amount and in fact have received your funds. There may be some people who have applied already or are still waiting for funding, but as a general amount, you should have received that. But we're going to walk you through that. The second thing you're going to do is you're going to calculate what we're referring to is the tentative allowable forgiveness amount. This is the first cut at the forgiveness amount. We're going to use an acronym of a TAFA. Just to shorten it up to give you, so as we work through these, you might want to learn these acronyms. They're ours. I don't know. They may come out. SBA may come out with their own at some point or another, but this is what we're working with. After you calculate your TAFA, the next thing you do is you take your first haircut on the forgivable amount, the tentative allowable forgivable amount. That haircut is on the full-time equivalent, and Mike will walk you through that. That's then followed by the compensation reduction haircut, or the CRH, which I'll walk you through. Once you then you will combine those three items and you will determine your allowable forgiveness amount. And then once you take the difference between that and your loan, that will give you your non-forgivable portion, which you will be obligated to pay back over 2 years at 1%. So we have put together a case study here. You should be seeing on your screen now. Basically some facts. I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail other than to point out a couple of things. First of all, on the left-hand side, you see a bunch of names. If anybody can figure out what the consistency of those names are, Mike has a prize for you. So we'll come back to that later. He can talk more about it. You'll see that we have hours, we have a pay rate. But the thing that I really want to bring to everybody's attention is that you'll see here on the cash compensation that even though on the annual salary, Wagner and Carey and Collins all are being paid over $100,000 in compensation, you'll see in the column to the right of that we've capped that at $100,000. Now, to demonstrate that compensation is, for definitional purposes under the PPP program, is deemed to be cash compensation plus benefits, we have added into the following column, the one to the right of the cash compensation column, health insurance, to demonstrate how that would play into there. Now, we'll get into other things that can be included in that number, but for simplicity purposes, we just included employer provided health insurance for purposes of this analysis. And so the thing I want to point out to you is you'll see, for example, under Collins, who is the third one from the bottom, that he had a base compensation of an annual comp of 120. It capped at $100,000. We added $10,000 for health insurance, such that his compensation for 2019, including benefits, was $110,000. And then in the middle, you'll see Reigns was $95,000. There's no cap on that because it's under 100. We added the 10 and you get to 105. So those are some of the parameters they work with. And you'll look at the bottom in red, on the bottom right on the red, you'll see that the total compensation for the year is $638,900. So from there, again, this is something that everybody should have done already. We then take and we determine the loan amount. And you'll see here, again, we took the annual compensation for everybody. You'll see that Reigns is at 105, Collins, Carey, and Wagner are all capped at 110. And you'll see that the total, the $638,900, agrees with the slide before. And as a result of that, we take that and we divide it by 12, the number of months in the year, which gives us our average monthly payroll. And that times 2.5 gives us the PPP loan. And that's what, in our example, we applied for and what we will have received funding for. So that's kind of determining the loan amount. Again, that is what we've already done. Everybody should have done by now. There is still some money available. So if you haven't applied, there still is an opportunity to do that. But this step, most people have completed at that particular point in time. So next, what we do is we calculate the tentative allowable forgiveness amount. And on this particular situation, what we want to point out are a couple of things. Even though the loan amount is predicated upon an average monthly and you take 2.5 times that, there's a lot of confusion that people think that the PPP forgiveness is based upon 2 months. And for those of us who follow this kind of stuff, there are 4.133 weeks in a month if you do it on an average basis. There are more than 2 weeks worth of payroll, or 2 weeks worth of anything in a particular, 4 weeks of anything in a particular month. So what we want to be clear here is that the PPP forgiveness is based upon 8 weeks, not 2 months, of allowable payroll and permitted expenses. And the allowable payroll is what is incurred during the 8-week period, and this is very important, and paid within the 8-week period. So, and this pay period occurs following the funding. So if you receive your funding on April 13th, your measuring period of incurred and paid occur starting on April 14th. As we talked about, the compensation is limited to $100,000 of annual compensation per employee, plus benefits. And these are some of the benefits: employer provided health benefits, which would include health insurance, major medical. It would include dental and vision if it's paid for by the employer. It includes state payroll taxes. Every state is different. Some have employer-based payroll taxes, some states don't. New Jersey has unemployment and disability insurance. I have a question mark next to that because my colleague Mike LaForge is not clear, and others have also commented that it's not clear whether those programs would be included. The literature seems to imply that it is included, but we're not 100% sure on that. We're gonna have to wait to see what kind of guidance comes out on that, because some have argued that those are really insurance premiums. They're not actually a tax. And so even though it's on payroll, we're not exactly clear on that, but the guidance seems to, or at least the consensus seems to be, that it is included. And then of course it's pension. And again, I want to be clear, it's incurred and paid. So if you make your entire pension contribution for an entire year in the 8-week period, you're not going to get a deduction for 100% of that. You're only going to get a deduction for the amount that you incurred during that 8-week period. So a pro rata share of that 8-week period. After you calculate the allowable payroll, then you're allowed an additional permitted expenses, which would include rent, utilities, mortgage interest, and interest on debt that's been incurred prior to February 15th of 2020. That area there, we didn't put it here because there's a little controversy surrounded around that too, because the definition of what is in debt that was incurred prior to 2/15/20 is a little unclear. For example, is credit card debt considered debt that would be for part of this calculation? We just don't know, and so we wanted to stay with things that were a little bit more certain. I think, Mike, if there's anything else that you might want to add to this slide, I think that covers what we wanted to cover here.
Nope, you checked off all my boxes.
Okay, good. Again, we continue with the calculation of the TAFA here. So you'll see that in our example, we have an annualized rent of $60,000, which would be $5,000 a month. Our utilities are running us $1,500 a month. So we multiply that times 2, we come up with $13,000. Now, if you recall, what I said was that we don't do this based upon a monthly basis, we do it upon 8 weeks. So if you take $13,000 and you divide it by, what am I doing here? So if you take 13,000 and you divide it by, you multiply it times 6, which would be an annual amount of utilities, and then divide by 52, you'll come up with a weekly amount. That in turn times 8 would give you the $12,000. It's also just a strict percentage if you want to apply it. Mike, what is that? 94%, I think you had said.
Yes, it comes out to be about 93%.
93%. So again, you annualize the monthly payments, and then you divide by 52, multiply times 8 weeks, and that gives you the amount that you can include as part of your forgivable amount. Now, on the right-hand side of this slide, you'll see here that we're using in our example that the loan funds were received on April 13th of 2020. And so the 8-week period actually ends on June 8th of 2020. It's a 56-day period. It's not 2 months again. I just want to be clear here. And then in our example, we used a semi-monthly pay period. And the reason that we're trying to demonstrate what's happening with the pay periods is, first of all, you'll see that the first pay period is made on April 15th, 2020. It covers the period of March 31st through April 14th. If you remember what I said a couple of minutes ago, and if you look at the bottom of the screen, it's incurred and paid. So even though we're paying people for essentially a period of time of March 31st through April 14th, we didn't incur all of that payroll during the period after the loan forgiveness. So the full amount of that pay period is not going to be subject to forgiveness. In fact, only 2 days will be, the 13th and the 15th, or maybe the 14th and the 15th, I should say. It's the period following the funds. So it'll be the 14th and the 15th. That'll be what's incurred even though we paid it. And then if you drop all the way down to the bottom of that particular section on the June 15th payroll, you'll see that that payroll is paid after the 56-day period is up, because the 56 days ends on June 8th. So what we believe, subject to any changes that may come along, what we believe is that what's going to happen is we're advising our clients that you're going to have to run a supplemental payroll on June 8th to cover the period of time through June 8th, so that you not only you're getting credit for what's being incurred, but in fact what is being paid has to be paid on June 8th. So keep that in mind as you go through your own calculations, that you may need to run a supplemental payroll to ensure that you get the benefit of a full 56 days of payroll subject to forgiveness.
Alan, that hits on a lot of questions that we're getting from people. And I want to run a poll, but looking, Debbie, where is Debbie? Do we have to pay the 8 weeks, not normal pay dates? So I think that's addressing it. I was on a meeting last night, and an attorney said that that you can look at the payroll before going back to February 15th. Had anybody heard that before? Let me surprise you with that one. But when the attorney said that to me last night, or to the group, I was actually very surprised.
So Brad, what I will say is that our caveats at the very beginning said this is a moving target. We're trying to present what we believe is reasonably conservative here.
Right.
I think if there's any guidance that comes out on that, we certainly will provide it and we'll update everybody on this. This is based upon our best knowledge at this particular point in time. And if you deal with the incurred and paid, incurred meaning that you incur it during the period after the funds are received and paid within the period of funds received, I would suggest that you cannot go back on that kind of bridge payroll that you had on the first payroll. Notwithstanding what that attorney said, and it's very possible he's correct. I just don't have any information towards that.
I didn't know if you had heard that. One other question, if we typically pay bonuses in June and can give it earlier and include it in the PPP, can they do that? I'm assuming they're saying it falls outside their window. Can they pay bonuses earlier?
It's a good question.
I'm going to launch a poll while you're thinking about it a second. Okay. For PPP, are you confused by the difficult calculations, understanding FTEs, knowing how to spend the funds, and calculation based on 8 weeks? Sorry about that, Alan. Hopefully, it gave you a second to collect your thoughts as I surprised you on that question.
Yeah, no, that's okay. No, that's okay. It's not surprising. It's actually a great question. Well, I think that you probably can include it, but you may have to annualize it, is what I'm thinking. I'm not really sure. We may have to get back to you on that one. And Mike, unless you have a thought or a view on that.
Well, I've run into that question from clients, not from the standpoint of bonuses, but from commissions and when they can get paid and how they can get paid. And the advice that I've been providing is exactly what you've said, Alan. My concern there is that if you deviate from what your normal operating situation was, that you do run the risk that something would not be forgivable. My advice would be you pay them as long as you have the ability to pay them. And if you have to pull them out of the loan forgiveness, you pull them out of the loan forgiveness calculation. You're no worse off. You're simply at least have done the paid part. And then you just got to figure out later on when we get guidance whether or not you can shoehorn that into the incurred part. So that would be my advice. I mean, you pay them as long as they're going to be due. If you're going to pay them anyway, pay them within the period. You can always yank them out.
Right. And Alan, you see from the if the results of the survey, I don't know if you could see it, or the result of the poll, 30% said the difficulty in the calculations is what they're confused by. Understanding FTEs is 17%, knowing how to spend the funds is 11%, and 42% said calculations based on 8 weeks. This seems to be the biggest area confusing those that were able to answer. So
good. Well, that's interesting. What I will say is that when you sit down with your own data, it starts to take a little bit of a life. And when you think about it in the theoretical world, it's much more complicated. So at some particular point in time, I think you do need to kind of just start putting pen to paper and working with real numbers, identifying those areas that are question marks, and then looking to find the answers to them. You know, certainly, as I said at the outset, we're here to help you through those calculations. We're here to help you navigate what those rules are. My guess is there's going to be some ambiguity here. Mike makes a very good point, which is that, you know, this is supposed to be a help here. And, you know, I think there are some people who would, you know, out there in the world who would love to game this. I think you kind of have to look at it and do what you think is right at that particular point in time. In worst case scenario, it may get scrutinized. You know, you certainly don't want to leave money on the table, but you don't want to game the system either in order to try to, you know, force to stuff more expenses in there. You know, for example, you can't prepay your rent and all of a sudden, you know, think that you're going to get forgiveness on that because it's not incurred in that 8-week period.
Well,
so
again, Alan, you know what, Alan,
a bit of an answer on that for you. Mike, go ahead.
I mean, and just picking up from what I said before, you know, you can prepay your rent, okay? You can prepay your rent, but you just have to understand that it may not be forgiven. So the whole goal of prepaying it in order to be able to get a larger forgiveness amount might not stand up, but at least you're in a position in case there's something wacky that comes out with guidance, which I don't see it, but you know, you can do it. And that's been the advice, you know. You can't go back and pay something subsequently. You can't pay it after the fact, but you can certainly not take that amount and request forgiveness.
Sorry, I'm going back on the slides, just I was looking for something. But so just moving ahead, so what happens here is that we now have a payroll register related costs. They're paid during the covered 8-week period. So you'll see these are what everybody has paid. And when you annualize that as a sort of a check to make sure that it's not greater than $100,000, you'll see that, like, for example, Collins, Carey, and Wagner, even though using the 8-week period, 16/9/23, we come up with annualized compensation related expenses of $110,000. Remember, it's $100,000 in cash compensation plus $10,000 in health benefits. Reigns is $95,000 plus $10,000 in health and benefits. None of the others had health benefits, so it's a straight calculation of the annualized amount. And so the 8-week payroll for our company on the tentative allowable forgiveness amount is $90,517,000. We add in our 8 weeks of rent and utilities, or you'll add in whatever your expenses are in those categories to come up with a TAFA, a tentative allowable forgiveness amount of $102,517. Remember, our loan was much bigger than that. It was about $130,000. And now what we have is a tentative forgiveness amount of about $103,000. And now we're going to talk about some additional haircuts that we need to take to that in order that will further reduce that amount of money.
Okay. So,
Mike?
So let me just throw a thought process out there in that, going back to what Alan said, the $133,000, which was the loan, versus the $102,000, which what we're referring to as the TAFA. And I do, pardon me, because I keep on looking back at Alan's acronyms over here, so I remember what they are. But people have to, I think, recognize that if there is an amount that has to go back that becomes a loan and is not forgiven, that does not mean you lost, okay? So that does not mean that you did something wrong or there was something that went haywire, that type of stuff. The loan amount was rigged to begin with, where it was actually going to give you more money that would be applied to an 8-week period because it was based upon a 2-month period. That's number one. And in our example, you're also going to see that when you calculated the loan amount, the calculation of loan amount had an amount that was there for the occupancy piece of this, which, again, just rough numbers, was about $26,000. And in our example, the rent utility figure for the forgiveness that actually fell in the period was $12,000. So what I'm basically suggesting is that there's a couple things that you sort of put somewhat in the rearview mirror. Number one is the loan amount being the total goal or that type of stuff. Like I said, you're going to get forgiven for what you actually spend. So if you don't spend something on payroll, you don't spend something on the occupancy costs, it's a loan, which is still good because, like I said, it's a low interest loan and you'll pay it back over the 2-year period. The other thing I think you need to put in the rear of your mirror is the calculation that you did when you made the PPP application, where you put down your head counts and that type of stuff. Because at the time, I remember there was so much confusion. What are you doing? Are you including part-time people, full-time people? Are you doing it based upon IRS standards? Are you doing it based upon CARES Act? I mean, on and on and on. And here we are right now looking at full-time equivalents, and we do not know from the standpoint of forgiveness exactly how we're going to count these things. But one of the things that what I'd like to suggest is that no matter how we do it, you're going to do it you're going to do it consistently throughout the calculation, whether it's the calculation of FTEs from 2019 or whether it's going to be FTEs during 2020. However it's going to end up, whether or not it's going to be based upon a 30-hour per week area, which would be the basis, which would be full-time according to SBA and under the CARE Acts, or 40 hours, which is a standard week for people under some of the IRS regulations. So for right now, we're going to use the 30-hour per week item, and we're going to use that because, like I said before, it is under the CARES Act. That's the amount that is deemed to be a full-time equivalent under that act, number one. And then number two, that's also the amount, the calculation that the AICPA has been touting and pushing Treasury and SBA to use, just for consistency. Key dates. I think for anyone who is on this call, they have to recognize that there are 5 Now, depending on how you look at it, 5 or 6 areas where you have to figure out what your full-time equivalents are. There's the 8-week period beginning with the receipt of the loan proceeds. Okay, so again, you need to figure out what your full-time equivalents were during that 8-week period. Then we have to look at the full-time equivalents for 2 different periods. February 15th through June 30th of 2019. Yes, that's a 4.5-month period. And then January 1st through February 29th of 2020. That's a 2-month period. But we have to go look at those 2 periods of time and come up with the monthly full-time equivalents for those 2 periods. So again, I guess what you're going to do is you're going to go through your payroll from February 15th to June 30th, 2019, calculate the full-time equivalents on a payroll by payroll basis, and then turn around and based upon the number of payrolls, you'll divide that into the amount and come up with your full-time equivalents. And then you'll do the same thing from January 1st through February 29th of 2020. The other key date, and we'll get into what this means a little bit later, is February 15th, 2020 in a vacuum, and then also the period February 15th through April 27th of 2020. And then the last key date would be from now through June 30th of 2020. Okay, so you got the next slide, Alan? So the first thing we want to do is we want to go through.
Yeah, it's coming. It's a little delayed. So.
Okay. We want to go through the calculations. So what we want to do is we want to find out what the full-time equivalents per month employed by the recipient during the period beginning February 15, 2019 and ending June 30, 2019, or the period beginning January 1st, 2020 and ending February 29th, 2020. I've already talked about this, but we're going to call that the base FTE. And once we see what those FTE numbers are, we're going to take the lowest amount and the reason why we're going to use the lowest amount, because under this calculation, what we're going to do is we're going to compare the base FTEs from the lower of those 2 periods to what we actually have for full-time equivalents during the 8-week period. And as long as we're able to maintain FTEs through that 8-week period, you're basically not going to have to take a haircut on the, what do you call it? The tentative allowable forgiveness amount, okay? So step 1, like I said, is calculate what we're calling the base FTE. Step 2 is calculating the covered period FTE, and that would be the FTEs for the 8-week period, which is also known as the covered period. And then step 3, divide the covered FTE by the base FTE to come up with the ratio to apply against the TAFA, okay? So again, if your base is the same as the covered, then you're in good shape. If there's a deviation, we'll get into that with the next slide. So, determining base FTEs. What we have here is we have a roster of our 10 employees with the number of hours that they're working on a weekly basis. Now, again, I'm trying to do this on a weekly basis, but what we would do is we would take this and we would explode it to a month in order to come up with FTEs. But I thought that this would be a little bit easier for us to look at. So if you look at all the people on this list, the equivalent amount we're coming up with is 8. So notice we have 10 people there. The top 4 of them are part-time. So what we do is we're going to take the total hours for those 4 part-time people. So it's the 10, the 20, the 20, and the 30. So that comes out to 30, 60. That comes out to 90. So we're going to take that 90 and we're going to divide it by 30 to come up with, it comes out to 80. My math's bad. So we're going to take those 80 hours, divide it by 30, which would be the FTE equivalent for a week, and we come up with 2 full-time equivalents that's comprised of those 4 part-time people. The other 6 on the list all hit that 40 hours work week. And again, if they had 30 in and of themselves, they would have been fine. So what happens there is that you actually come up with a total of FTEs of 8, okay? So that is calculation 1. That's the first calculation. So then what we do is we take the base FTEs from January 1st through February 29th of 2020, right? In this particular case, and again, this is just to demonstrate the difference in the calculation. In this particular case, we have the same 6 on the bottom, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, working up bottom to top. And then you have the 4 other individuals who work 10 hours each. So in their particular case, you're going to take the 40 hours combined, divide it by 30, and you come up with 1. So again, just rounding, not rounding up and not using fractions, your full-time equivalents for that particular period would be 7. Okay. So
Hey, Mike, hey, Alan, can you go back to the previous slide? Because we had a couple questions come in. Yeah, I want to clarify that the FTEs are based on anything over 30, right?
30,
Because
right.
Jerry asked a question. And
Okay.
also somebody wanted to know why it's not 9. Like, would you add up, anything that makes over 9?
Let me go through that again. So what you do is you go through, and the bottom 7 in this particular case all exceed 30 hours. So each one of those counts as a full-time equivalent. So that's where you get the 7. The top 3, and I may have said the top 4 before, but the top 3, when you add up the 20, the 20, and the 10, come up to 50 hours. You divide that by 30, so that actually equals 1 full-time equivalent. So that's where you get to the 8. And so if I confuse people the first time through, I apologize. But like I said, it's the top 3 would be the part-time people.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so so then if you go to the determining the base FTEs, so what we're doing now is that we're looking at the 2 base periods. We see the one base period for 2019 is 8, and the other base period is for 2020 is 7. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the January 1st, 2020 date through February 29th of 2020 as our base FTE period. So we're going to go with 7. Okay, so that's the key. Now, when we start looking to see whether or not we have to apply a reduced percentage. On the next slide, we're going to take and look at it from the standpoint of comparing our base FTEs, which are 7, and that's for the period that ended 2/29, 2020. And then we're going to look at the covered period, which is also 7. If that's the case, boom, you're done. Okay, you've passed that first hurdle from the standpoint of no haircut against the TAFA, the tentative allowable forgiveness amount. Okay, so as long as that works, you're in good shape with at least having as a start 100%. If you go to scenario 2, in this particular one, we've taken the base FTEs as 7. If you look at what we have as far as full-time equivalents in that particular case, we're basically saying that for the 8-week period, you only have 6. So in that particular case, you have dropped 1 FTE, and because you've dropped 1 FTE, you now only have forgiveness for 6/7. That's the ratio. So it would be 6/7 or 86% of what, again, the tentative allowable forgiveness amount is. Okay, so it's at this point, it's kind of simple. Okay. Now, the next one is scenario 3. Okay. Oh, okay. So that would be the haircut that you would take after scenario 2. So if we go from 7 down to 6, the 102 gets reduced by about 14%. So the TAFA after the FTE haircut, and that's what we're calling it a haircut, is $88,165. Now, there is a scenario where you can actually get it to the point where you can correct, or you can actually have a redo as far as this haircut is concerned. Now, for the rest of the conversation, when Alan kicks back in, we're going to assume that you took that haircut for that one lost FTE. But there is a provision in there that allows you to correct and make a correction. So what you do is you take your head count as of 2/15, and let's say it's 7. And then let's say, for instance, between 2/15 and 4/27, your head count goes to 6. All right, so we're back in that same situation. You can actually correct that drop in employment by rehiring someone for the periods between, let's just say, now and June 30th. So this way you have your full forgiveness amount reestablish that 100%. So again, like I said, you go through your calculation and you find out that you're short that one person based upon scenario 2. You're short that one person. What you can do is you have a period of time where you can correct that. You can look at your payroll on 215. If your payroll on 215 was 7 people, then you look at your payroll between 215 and 427. And if you see that those were 6 people, you can actually go out, rehire that one person or hire someone new to actually correct and get yourself back up to 100%. So that is I think it's a key point there in case you do see where your FTEs have dropped, you actually have a way to, to correct that. One other thing that I think is also important to point out, I mentioned before the Q&A from the SBA, and there is a question in there that concerns the rehiring of staff people or employees, and that's number 40. So what happens if you want to make that correction? You want to use the provision that's there that allows you to correct the loss of FTEs. So you make the offer to an employee, and the employee says, "Oh no, I'm not coming back. I'm either afraid to come back to work, or else my unemployment is sufficient to keep me going." Well, what you need to do is you need to make sure that you make that offer for reemployment in writing. Make sure you have it in writing, make sure you have it documented, and do your best to get some sort of documentation back from the employee that they refuse to come back to work. Once you do that, that counts as a FTE for purposes of this makeup, for purposes of this remeasurement that we just talked about. So again, that's a key point to, I think, to clients and any recipients here, because we are seeing that more and more where employment offers are out there, but people aren't coming back to work. So that's my scenario.
But do you have to replace them with somebody else then, you're saying? Or is just making the offer acceptable?
Well, making the offer is acceptable, and at this point in time, I don't know that there's guidance out there that says what happens afterwards. So in other words, it would appear to me that the way it's written right now is that you make the offer, that's your FTE. Because don't forget, you're still not going to have those dollars. If somebody doesn't come back in, and Alan will get into that, if somebody is offered the employment and doesn't come back in, you're not going to get forgiveness for the dollars. You're just not going to get, in this particular case, that first haircut because of FTEs. And I think that's the one that we really need to focus on, because I think on a dollar-wise, that adjustment is probably going to be, could be the biggest, particularly from the standpoint of, because all the other adjustments are based upon money that you did not spend. In this particular one, it's going to put a ceiling on. So we have to be really careful with these FTEs.
Okay.
So if you kind of just take a step back for a minute and you think about this big picture, to Mike's point, if you don't pay somebody, you're not going to get forgiveness on something you didn't pay. Right. The way that the FTE works is it says, even if you pay somebody, if you reduce your full-time equivalents down, you're going to have to take a haircut. What this provision that Mike talked about, the offer, does is it says, we're going to give you a pass if you did have a reduction in your full-time equivalents, but you made an offer to somebody in good faith and did it in writing. We're not going to have you take an additional haircut on top of the fact that you didn't pay them. Right. So that's kind of the theory a little bit behind that.
Right. And this also, pardon me, Alan, this also goes back to the whole point about doing the whole bit with the commissions or the bonuses during the period. Again, if you cut employees, so if you had 20 employees and you cut them down to 15, and now you're going to start shoving some bonuses into that period, you're taking a reduction of 25% right off the top because your FTEs didn't match up. So again, this is why I've continued to say that this whole bit with FTEs and that type of stuff, this whole program not only was supposed to continue for the compensation levels as dollar-wise, but it was also supposed to take care of maintaining the employment numbers, the people that are actually working. And that seems to be one of the overriding factors here as far as this forgiveness program is concerned.
So I'm going to try to fly through this. Unfortunately, it's a bit complicated, but we're already way over our time, because this is a lot to digest here. So hopefully,
And we have a poll that we have to put out there, Alan.
all right, so why don't you do that, and I'll start to introduce the compensation reduction after you ask the poll and you're waiting.
Is your PPP disbursement under 2 million, over 2 million? I did not apply.
Okay, so just to take a step back, if you recall, our first step after the computational loan was to determine a tentative allowable forgiveness amount, a TAFA, and that's the maximum amount that you'd be able to get as a credit. We based that upon the payroll that you actually made during the 8-week period, plus the benefits, plus the other expenses. So that's where we begin. And then as Mike talked about, if your headcount went down and you didn't correct it in some way or another during a measurement period, you then have to take a further haircut on that maximum allowable amount. The second haircut that we are going to be talking about now is what I'm referring to as the compensation reduction haircut. And what this says essentially is that if you have an employee that made less than $100,000, and I'll come back to in a second, makes less than $100,000, and their payroll went down during that 8-week period over the average amount that you used by more than 25%, then there will be a dollar for dollar adjustment further to reduce the TAFA. If the adjustment is less than 25%, then there is no adjustment. And let me be clear on something. That when I say that if it's greater than 25%, there'll be a dollar for adjustment. It's a dollar for dollar adjustment for the amount that exceeds 25%. And I'll demonstrate that in a minute. But I just want to be clear. Brad, you want to report the results?
Oh, yeah, under 73% said under 2 million, 15% said over, 12 didn't apply. I don't know if they're not going to apply, and this is just a cool place to hang out. That's what I'm hearing from a lot of people, that they like coming here Thursdays. So go ahead, Alan.
It's probably our staff who don't actually apply. But so anyways, so basically, again, if it's under 25%, no adjustment. If it's greater than 25%, the amount that exceeds 25% will be a dollar for dollar adjustment to reduce the tentative allowable forgiveness amount. What's not clear is we said that if the compensation is greater than $100,000, you do not have to make this adjustment. What's not clear is whether that means if you got somebody making $101,000 and you bring them down to $90,000, does that mean there's no adjustment because their comp prior to this was greater than 101? Or do you factor in the amount from 100 down? We don't really know the answer to that question. And we're going by the letter of it in this illustration that says if it's greater than 100, you don't have to make an adjustment. But I have a feeling that that's going to be corrected because it seems a little bit unfair to the person who's making, let's say, $101,000 and you bring them down to 40. When I say it's not unfair to them, it doesn't affect them, but it's unfair to the calculation that you wouldn't have to take an adjustment on that. So if you go back to the data set that we had, and again, there's a lot of material on here, and these slides will be available for everybody if you want. I want to highlight the ones that are impacted here. So if you take a look at Hamilton, who is the third one down. Well, let me start with Henderson, who's at the top. Henderson stopped working, so even though his difference was $2,000 and it's 100% difference, because he didn't work during the 8-week period, we don't count him towards his compensation reduction haircut. If you then move to Hamilton, you'll see that Hamilton if you take his annualized salary and you convert it to an 8-week period, it would be $3,000. But what was actually paid to him during that 8-week period is, I can't see without my glasses, is $1,920. So the difference is $1,688. His difference, I'm sorry, I'm on the wrong line. That was Cobb. On Hamilton, it was a $1,080 differential. And it was a 31% reduction. So if you take the difference between 31% and 25%, that's 6%, and 6% of $3,000 should be $330. There's a rounding issue in there, but accept the math as being correct. And the same would be true for Cobb and Latham. All had greater than 25%, so they in fact have a further compensation. We take a further haircut on the tentative amount, which totals $1,418. Again, we didn't factor in anything for the others that are over $100,000 because again, the rules say that if it's over $100,000, you don't have to make an adjustment.
Alan, can I chime in for a second?
Yep.
As far as the calculation that Alan's referring to, it's kind of simple. For Hamilton, if you look at his $3,000, which was his first quarter wages, you basically just take 75% of that. And 75% of 3,000 is 2,250. You compare the 2,250, which is again 75%, to what he was actually paid, which was 1,920. So since he was paid 1,920, the differential, his cut in pay of $330 becomes the amount that he was cut in dollars over the 25%, and then becomes part of the haircut calculation that Alan's referring to. This way you don't have to mess around with 31% versus 25% and that type of stuff. It's a simple math type of thing. You take his first quarter wages, multiply by 75%. That basically is the floor from where you can cut wages. If you needed to cut wages, you compare it to what he was actually paid, and whatever the differential is becomes the amount that is the haircut. So you're not going to get, because again, the idea here was not to get a full-time equivalent, but then turn around and cut the guy's payroll down to, something significantly less.
Thanks, Mike. That does simplify it. So you'll see at the bottom right, we take the amount that's over 25% of a reduction, and that becomes our compensation reduction haircut, $1,418. Again, now we start to summarize again. Our TAFA, if we remember from the beginning, our original tentative allowable forgiveness amount was $102,517. Mike walked you through the FTE reduction, which was 14% of that amount, or $14,352. That gives us a TAFA after the full-time equivalent haircut of $88,000. And then we take a further compensation reduction haircut of $1,418, which would give us then at that particular point our final allowable forgiveness amount. So this is the amount of the loan that will be forgiven based upon the calculations that we've done. I just want to point out one other thing with regard to the compensation reduction haircut. What I'm not clear on here, and I don't know the answer, is if the actual amount over 25% exceeds the amount of that you claimed on your tentative amount in the first place, do you go below zero? Do you still have to take that amount, or does it stop at zero? And the answer to that question is we just don't know. There's not enough guidance right now to tell us what would be applied there. Whereas the FTE is applied on a global basis, this is applied on a line-by-line basis. But if you apply the FTE to the lines, you may find out that you're actually going negative on the tentative amount that you've claimed. So again, a little bit more of a complication, but a nuance I wanted to point out. And so then we finally get to the point, or if you recall that our original loan was $133,104. Our final allowable forgiveness amount was $86,000. And so what you're going to be left with here is a loan repayment of $46,357, which you will have to pay back within 2 years at 1% interest. And I think what's important here is that all these calculations are an example of what's being done, but at the end of the day, you will actually apply for your loan forgiveness with your lender. They are the ones who will have their forms and how they want you to do this, what backup and information will be needed, and they will ultimately be the ones who are approving that forgiveness when all is said and done. So that takes us to the end, Brad. I turn it over to you, and we can field any questions as best as we possibly can.
We got a lot of questions. Try and get through it before we have 7 minutes left. The EIDL, the EIDL loans, is that impacted forgiveness in any way? Is it an earthquake in Rockaway, Alan?
Yeah, sorry. Hopefully that's better. I don't know. Yeah.
The EIDL loans. If you receive, or EIDL grant, if you received it after the PPP, will that affect your forgiveness?
I don't know the answer to that. I would I remember early in the game where the EIDL amounts, if you got them before the PPP, that they would affect the loan forgiveness and that type of stuff. It would come out of that. But post, I'd have to look. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that.
And somebody's saying it too, Courtney, and what I heard also is that if you use the idle for payroll, then you can't use it towards your PPP. That was one of the things I had heard. I'm trying to pick one out real quick. Oh my gosh, I had it. If you rehire the same person, what's included in utilities? That's come up a few times. I want to make, if we can just clarify that. We've talked about it a lot every week, but people still seem to be asking it.
Okay, so I'll take that. The whole thing with utilities is that when I first looked at the CARE Act and looked at this whole thing with utilities, it seems to me as that utilities all have to do with being associated with occupancy and that type of stuff. And I think through reading and interpretations that I've seen from both internally, but also from other professionals and people that are in this space, utilities are including obviously the ones that electric, heat, gas, and so on and so forth. We've seen telephone. I was surprised when I saw the first talk about possibly internet type of stuff, but that seems to have a lot of traction. We don't know exactly. That's all I can sort of tell you at this point in time. The other part that it was interesting, and I sort of chuckled, is that within the utility section, they also talked about transportation. So some people right away started talking about, oh, gee whiz, there's my car lease, there's my gasoline, no, the transportation I think that they're referring to is that many utilities in some areas of the country, or actually everywhere, you can get two bills. One is for the gas or the service itself, and the other part is for the transportation to get that service to your business, to your home. So that's the transportation part. But like I said, we don't have that guidance, but I think the utility part is basically, it's going to end up exactly where I've stated. How they're going to do it over the 56-day period because of the way utilities are always paid in arrears, I don't know, because that's going to be kind of unfair, because if your forgiveness period ends on the second of the month, you're certainly not going to have your utility bill yet paid for the previous 30 some odd days. So we'll wait and see.
And Mike, I think you raise a good point of that last thing, which is the devils are always in the details. And so, this program here was not designed to get into every nuance. We're happy to field your questions on those and try to give you our best guess of what those may be at that particular point in time. But just keep in mind something. This is a program that's designed to help failing businesses. It's not designed for everybody to squeeze out every last penny or figure out a way to game the system. Even though the Treasury has come out and said that they're not going to be reviewing or loans that are less than $2 million, I would suggest to you that the statute in our last program, they talked about the statute of limitations on fraud. Don't go crazy here. Be conservative in your approaches to things. Be fair. Don't cheat yourself, but also don't try to push the envelope too hard. I had a professor when I got my master's in tax who had a famous line, which was, pigs get fat and hogs get slaughtered. And so, by all means, eat from the trough, but don't overeat, because you may find yourself with a whole lot of explaining to do. And I don't think any of us want to see that happen. So use logic, use things that make sense. Don't use your gas for your car when they're talking about utilities being transportation of utilities, not the other way around. So anyways.
Sounds like your closing comment, but we still have 2 minutes.
No, I'm not closing yet.
Okay. So this one might be a legal question. If you offer them their job back and they say no, can they still collect unemployment? And while you're answering that, I'm going to post the next poll, because I don't want to forget that, because like Phil, who can't answer, is dying to get his CPE. We don't know why he can't answer, Phil, but we trust you. To prepare to reopen, did you order PPP for employees? To prepare to reopen, did your order for PPP employees? I don't know what that, do we order I'm thinking PPE. Sorry, I'm out of it. Reconfigure office space, choose to phase in slowly, or all of the above. So Alan or Mike, do you have any question, any response on people filing for unemployment?
Yes, if you go into the Q&A from the SBA, it's question number 40. It talks about making an offer to the same employee and offering them to rehire them, and they decline. It talks about the documentation principle, but it closes with this sentence. It says employees and employers should be aware that employees who reject offers of reemployment may forfeit eligibility for continued unemployment compensation. So that's
Thank
what
you.
the Q&A says.
Thank you. 58% said all of the above. I'm going to ask one more question because we're right at 9:30. I think it was Cheryl's asked a bunch of questions. Thanks for attending, Cheryl. And kind of couple of them together. If people have gotten waivers or extensions on their leases or for their lines of credit, not lines of credit, a mortgage interest, but they could pay based on this, do you recommend them paying even though they got the deferrals?
I would recommend that you pay them because unless we know otherwise, I would hate to find out that you could have paid rent of $10,000 to cover the month of May, and you got deferral from your landlord, and then you find out later on that because I paid May rent in July, I can't get forgiveness even though I had the money. So I think that I would absolutely pay it as incurred, because when you think about it, that's why you got the PPP money. I think in the scheme of things, this whole bit about taking the payroll and multiplying it by 2.5 to cover the occupancy was to be able to stabilize the real estate market and give people incentive to pay rents and take care of those type of things during this period. So absolutely. I think, and again, just to expand on this thing, I think that's one of the challenges that we're having with clients, and that's the timing of rent payments. What happens if you got your PPP money on April 6th and you already paid your April rent on April 1st? Well, you didn't pay it. You incurred it during the 8-week period, but you didn't pay it. I'm hoping that when we get answers to this stuff, that is addressed so that you can have some sort of a quasi accrual base for this type of stuff. I don't know whether or not it's going to happen, but we're keeping our fingers crossed.
Great. So we're at 9:31. We're supposed to go to 9:30. If I can ask the attendees, if you have any other topics you'd like to hear, if you want to hear an expansion on this, if you want to hear about how we pick our blue shirts every week, we're happy to talk about things that interest you, so long as it's within our bailiwick. But it's 9:32. If Mike and Alan, if you can give me one last closing comment to send these people on their way and, wish them luck.
Mike, you want to go first?
Yeah, well, my closing comment is that there's going to be more to come. We at Sobel Co. are doing every effort to keep people advised as often as possible without being annoying, by sending out blasts on a daily basis. I think the communication with our principals and our managers and our staff here, as far as clients are concerned, is very, very important, just to keep abreast. Make sure that there's something that came up over the past week or over the past couple of days is discussed and vetted so that we can serve your needs the best way. So keep the communication going. If you have questions, don't be shy. Send the questions over. Send them emails, and we'll certainly make every effort to give you the answer that's appropriate.
Great.
And I'm just going to reinforce what Mike said. You're not alone out there. This is very, very complex. If you think your taxes can be complex at times, or your financial reporting can be complex at times, we totally understand. This PPP is very complex. We have a team that's working on this. I've mentioned this before. We have a COVID desk, a help desk on that. We have SWAT teams that are really analyzing each of these areas. Even today's presentation was a tremendous team effort, and I want to give a shout out to some of our staff who really helped us present to this. Paul Bennett, Enid Guzman, Tyler Callahan, and Phil Saxon. The four of them worked late into the night, the last couple of nights, to put together the scenario here, and we really appreciate their efforts, along with Colleen Logan, who has been organizing all of these events. So Sobel Co.'s here for you. We wish you all well. Hopefully you've got the money that you need to help your businesses, kind of navigate for a period of time. I know it's not the be all and end all, especially if your business is shut down, but hopefully it's a little bit of a lifeline. And I know there's a lot of there's a lot of commentary about this program, but I will tell you from my experience, it's actually been a pretty good and effective program. Perhaps it's not getting directly into the hands of people that are in need, but it is getting in the hands of employers who are it's helping keep people employed. And ultimately that means that people in need are getting the checks, or they would be in need if they weren't getting them. So let's look at the positive side of things. Let's hope that we are able to get back to work on a more consistent basis in the days and weeks ahead. And we just wish you all very, very well. And thank you for participating today.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Hi, everybody.